Hello guys, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0 and we are back in new fanfic. What if Naruto became Kushina's mysterious landlord and their bond changed the entire Naruto timeline? Part 1. The peculiar landlord. Deep mountains, dense forests, towering trees reaching the sky, and branches swaying amidst a myriad of trees. The brilliant sunrays penetrate through the gaps in the foliage, casting mottled traces and adorning the fragrant path with a sense of leisure and laziness. At this moment, two figures stroll along the path in the forest. Their pace is not fast and is devoid of any sense of urgency. On the left walks a woman of about 40 years old, with a calm complexion and a solemn expression. Her brown hair is neatly tied into a bun behind her head, and she wears a forehead protector with the symbol of Konoha village. There is a faint coldness between her eyebrows. On the right is a girl who appears to be 8 or 9 years old. Her flowing red hair cascades freely behind her, and her sparkling eyes continuously survey the scenery along the way. Through her childlike pupils, one can perceive the constant bursts of anticipation, longing, and a slight unease about the future that she struggles to conceal. Kushina. Not far ahead is Konoha village, where you will live from now on. If you encounter any problems in the future, you can come to me. The middle-aged woman's voice is calm and steady. From her words, one can sense her desire to take care of the girl named Kushina. However, for some reason, whether it's due to her personality or the environment she's in, she fails to fully express her innermost thoughts in her tone. Yes. Kushina nods heavily. She has been escorted by Konoha shinobi all the way until they are close to Konoha village. At that point, the Konoha shinobi handed her over to the middle-aged woman standing in front of her. Based on their initial introduction, Kushina learned that the middle-aged woman's name is Sarutobi Bawako, and she holds an extraordinary position within Konoha village as the wife of the third Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen. Kushina, don't burden yourself with any psychological pressure. Konoha village and Uzumaki village have been allies for generations. Just consider Konoha village as your own home. Seemingly aware that she appeared somewhat indifferent, Sarutobi Bawako deliberately squeezes out a smile, trying to appear more amiable while still maintaining the serious demeanor of someone in a high-ranking position within the system. I understand. Kushina nodded once again, appearing particularly obedient. She cherished the opportunity to come and live in Konoha village. Oh, by the way. Suddenly, Sarutobi Hiruzen seemed to remember something and immediately turned his head towards Kushina. Since you're not familiar with Konoha village, we have decided to arrange your residence closer to the Ninja Academy. As Sarutobi Hiruzen spoke, he paused briefly, allowing Kushina a moment to respond. However, seeing that she remained silent, he continued. The house we're providing you is not owned by Konoha village. It belongs to another child around your age. To tell the truth, he's had a difficult life. His parents sacrificed themselves during a mission, leaving behind only this house. To make ends meet, the spare bedroom in the house is rented out. We have arranged for you to rent that bedroom. Is the house big? Kushina exclaimed. When she left Uzumaki village, the villagers told her that Konoha village was more prosperous and wealthy. Not really. Sarutobi Hiruzen hesitated and shook his head. Are there only 2 bedrooms? Kushina was taken aback, curiosity gleaming in her innocent eyes. Just one. Sarutobi Hiruzen's serious face showed a hint of embarrassment, but it quickly vanished. Oh, I see. Kushina's eyes widened with surprise. It was different from what she had imagined. However, as a newcomer and a child, she couldn't make any excessive demands. She went along and said, "It's still nice to meet someone my age. It will help me adjust to the village and fit in at school." The house's owner is a boy. Sarutobi Hiruzen's face began to show a hint of frustration. Konoha village was facing financial difficulties, and providing Kushina with a separate house would be too costly, considering they already had to provide support for that child. so they decided to use one of the bedrooms as a rental space. After all, the boy didn't need it. Huh. Kushina's beautiful eyebrows furrowed abruptly, her black eyes widening in shock. A boy, she was born in a ninja world plagued by constant warfare, and she already had some understanding of many things, even at her young age. But living in the same bedroom as a boy, that didn't seem right. Kushina's bright red lips twitched slightly, as if she wanted to voice her doubts but didn't know how to start. She hesitated multiple times, on the verge of speaking, but ultimately remained silent. I know what you're worried about. Just at that moment, Sarutobi Bawako spoke slowly. Her tone was steady and solemn, trying to convey a sense of reassurance to Kushina. In fact, that boy has a peculiar personality. The sacrifice of his parents has caused him great mental trauma. As a result, he has a hearing impairment and struggles to understand the meaning behind people's words clearly. His language expression is also problematic, often failing to convey his thoughts accurately. This leads to his silence and isolation, with hardly any friends. Most importantly, he never sleeps at home at night. Instead, he goes for runs in the forest or swims in the lake. According to Sarutobi Bawako, it seems that he uses these activities to alleviate the depression in his heart. Sarutobi Bawako described a child with what seemed to be some psychological issues, a not uncommon case in the ninja world where pain and tragedy played out almost every moment. However, these details were not important. What was important was that this boy was particularly good at keeping secrets. This would not only save expenses but also prevent any disclosure of Kushina's situation. I understand. Kushina's eyes suddenly brightened as she instantly grasped the other person's intention. Perhaps she was meant to help comfort this emotionally wounded boy, which added a sense of purpose to her heart. It was as if she had found additional value in coming to Konoha village. Oh, I almost forgot to mention that boy's name is. Sarutobi Bawako's steady and solemn gaze was fixed ahead, and the gates of Konoha village could be vaguely seen. She was well aware that with Kushina stepping through those gates, a new era would dawn upon the village. Araki. Would release Kekkei Genkei. Araki. What a memorable name. Kushina silently repeated it in her mind several times and quickly memorized it. At the same time, she became intensely curious about the peculiar house owner, who was the same age as her. It seems, coming to study in Konoha would be quite an interesting thing. While Sarutobi Bawako was explaining some things about Konoha, Kushina's mind had already drifted far away, imagining what that boy named Araki would be like to be around. Not long after, the two of them passed through the gates of Konoha, led by Sarutobi Bawako, without encountering any obstacles. So, this is Konoha. As Kushina entered Konoha, she was immediately captivated by the scenery. What caught her eye were the three colossal stone faces carved into the mountainside, exuding a grand and imposing aura. The ground was neatly paved with bricks and surrounded by lush greenery. Although she was in the village, she felt as if she were immersed in a forest. The atmosphere here is quite different from Uzumaki village. The elements of trees, lakes, mountains, buildings, and more seamlessly merged together, creating a harmonious blend with nature without any pollution or destruction of the original environment. It's a bit different from what I imagined, Kushina observed as she walked. At this time, nearing the end of the school day, there weren't many people active in the village, making it relatively quiet. The Ninja Academy is just ahead. Sarutobi Bawako raised her hand and pointed to the wooden structure within the protective fence at the end of the tree-lined avenue. We won't go to the Ninja Academy for now. It's almost time for school to end. Tomorrow, you can go there to register. Let me take you to your place first. Sarutobi Bawako calmly and methodically made arrangements. Her personality was composed and meticulous, and she had already arranged everything in great detail before Kushina arrived in Konoha. However, there was a small issue here. But in her eyes, it wasn't much of a problem. The thing was that she hadn't informed the owner, Araki, in advance about using his bedroom. Because she believed that Araki wouldn't understand anyway. Ring ring ring. Accompanied by a sharp but not piercing bell sound, the teacher on the podium of the Ninja Academy bowed to the students in the classroom and then walked towards the classroom door, ending today's class. In an instant, the classroom became noisy. Students packed up their belongings and relaxed while chatting with their classmates. School dismissal was the most joyful moment for them. In the back corner of the classroom by the window, a seemingly ordinary figure still maintained the posture of resting their hands on the desk. However, after their tightly closed eyelids trembled slightly, they slowly lifted up, revealing eyes filled with drowsiness. Another day has passed. Araki sighed silently in his heart. His quiet figure was inconspicuous in the bustling classroom, and few gazes landed on him. After all, his classmates in the class knew that he had hearing and communication difficulties, making it impossible for him to interact normally. Over time, he also lost friends. But Araki didn't mind. He didn't come here to make friends, he came here to learn. That's right. He was one of the few who genuinely came to school with a heartfelt desire to learn. However, he didn't show an overly studious appearance. Skillfully closing the book spread open on his desk, which had become wrinkled from being pressed during his sleep, Araki did so only to conceal the fact that he had privately read this book many times. On the surface, it seemed like Araki slept in class and didn't pay attention, but in reality, he had already gone through these textbooks countless times and knew them by heart. It's been almost 3 years, right? Araki watched as the figures gradually left the classroom and silently sighed in his heart. He followed the crowd out of the classroom and headed towards his residence. Actually, he wasn't from the ninja world. 3 years ago, he woke up and found himself here, becoming a child named Araki. At that time, Araki's parents had sacrificed their lives while on a mission. Based on the timeline, he believed that Araki, after learning of his parents' deaths, suffered a great shock and ended up transmigrating by some strange twist of fate. Since then, he has become Araki and has been living like that until now. Unlike other transmigrators, Araki's transmigration was a bit peculiar. He didn't possess a system that could change his destiny, and he didn't even inherit the memories of the original host. If it weren't for having watched the Naruto anime, he probably wouldn't even know where he was. This forced him to pretend that he had suffered a mental shock. During this time, he learned the language and writing of the ninja world and tried his best to avoid exposing his identity as a transmigrator. During this period, Araki discovered something that both surprised and delighted him. He actually possessed the same wood release Kekkei Genkei as Hashirama Senju, the first Hokage. He wasn't clear about the circumstances of his previous self. Was the previous self originally like this, or did he undergo a change after transmigrating? There were no answers. But for Araki, this powerful talent became a source of both joy and trouble. Wood release had a very high ceiling, but it wasn't like the Sharingan, which could immediately enhance one's basic combat abilities. As a rookie in the ninja world, Araki hadn't even figured out how to use chakra, let alone control this top-level Kekkei Genkei. The innocent suffer while the guilty go free. Araki was well aware of this principle. He knew that once he exposed his wood release to others without absolute strength, he would become a thorn in the eyes of many, and at worst, Orochimaru might directly drag him into his laboratory. Araki was a relatively calm person even before transmigrating, and now that he found himself in a world full of slaughter and conspiracy, he immediately devised a plan for himself. He had to carefully accumulate his own strength and never let others know about his wood release until he could fully master it. Lost in his thoughts, Araki had already returned to his residence. He planned to put his backpack away, have some food for nutrition, and use the cover of darkness to train. For him, improving his chakra control was the most tangible task, while everything else was merely illusory. As Araki approached his home's door, his eyebrows furrowed. He noticed that the door was slightly ajar, and he could faintly hear the voice of a woman inside. Instantly, his inner alertness reached its peak. Roommates. What's going on? A thief? Or is it a woman? Araki stared intently at the partially open door, his eyes filled with caution. He knew that there was nothing valuable inside his house, the kind that would make even a thief shed tears. Considering the risk and reward ratio, his house wasn't worth the risk for a theft, especially by a female thief. Didn't they do market research before coming? Or perhaps, it wasn't about stealing at all. With these thoughts in mind, Araki quietly took a step back. As a young boy living alone, he still had the basic sense of self-defense. It was important to protect oneself in unfamiliar places. Creak. However, just as Araki hesitated, contemplating whether he should leave and seek help from the Konoha Security Division, the partially open door was pushed open. What came into view was a modestly dressed and composed middle-aged woman. Her hair was tightly tied back, and her face showed no expression, appearing quite cold. Is this Sarutobi Bawako? Araki's gaze fell upon this middle-aged woman, and there was a faint sense of familiarity, as if he had seen her in an anime before. But it was his first time seeing her in the ninja world. He wasn't entirely certain. After all, Sarutobi Bawako was the wife of the third Hokage, someone an ordinary person like him wouldn't easily encounter. Because she could be considered the first lady of Konoha. Could it be that she discovered his ability to use wood release? Could it be that she discovered my ability to use wood release? Otherwise, why would she casually enter my room for no reason? At this moment, Araki considered many possibilities. His face didn't show any complex emotions, but inside, he was extremely cautious. Oh, Araki, you're back. Sarutobi Bawako's face, as calm as an ancient well, blossomed with a smile like an iceberg melting. The sudden gentle tone made Araki's whole body covered in goosebumps. In that instant, Araki became even more flustered. We have found tenants for the house you entrusted us to rent. Sarutobi Bawako said self-consciously, appearing to care about Araki's reaction, but in reality, she was acting alone. Quote? A bunch of question marks immediately popped up in Araki's head. He couldn't understand what Bawako was talking about at all. What entrusted? What tenants? When did I say I wanted to rent out this house? If the house is rented out, where will I live? What is going on here? How did it end up being entrusted and rented like this? Are they taking advantage of an honest person? After being bewildered for a moment, Araki immediately realized that Bawako might think he had mental issues. Since he couldn't understand or explain clearly, she simply took advantage of the situation. This act of entrusting someone was too clever. It truly left him at a loss for words. Araki immediately understood the other's intentions. Even if he wanted to deny it now, the previous narrative had already been established. He couldn't say anything, or else all his pretenses from the past 3 years would go down the drain. Of course, he didn't believe that Bawako saw through his true nature. This behavior was simply taking advantage of him. This is the tenant who will be living in your house. Sarutobi Bawako didn't pay any attention to Araki. In her eyes, all of Araki's expressions and changes were normal. This kid didn't understand anything, so he could be exploited for as much as possible. I've already paid her 10 years worth of rent. Since you don't stay in the room at night anyway, let her stay there. As Bawako spoke, she pushed Uzumaki Kushina, who was hiding behind her, forward. Oh, I almost forgot to mention, her name is Uzumaki Kushina. Bawako added as a final remark, and a faint smile appeared on the corners of her mouth. For Konoha, this was the best outcome. After all, Kushina had come here with a unique purpose. She was an incredibly important tool, and her positioning wasn't easy to arrange. If they made her specifications too exaggerated, it would not only arouse Kushina's suspicion but also draw the attention of many eyes focused on Konoha. Placing her in an ordinary child's house was actually the best means of protection for someone like Kushina, a tool with a specific purpose. Having said that, Sarutobi Bawako didn't say anything else. She immediately left. Quote. Araki stared blankly at everything that had just happened. He was on the verge of shouting out, but he held himself back. If he reacted too strongly, he might expose himself. But this girl, Uzumaki Kushina, oh my god. After Araki exclaimed inwardly, he suddenly felt a headache. He was in the middle of Konoha and didn't want to get involved in any trouble. To outsiders, he was just a child who had experienced psychological trauma. It was an excellent disguise, allowing him to quietly improve his skills until he could control the wood-release Kekkei Genkai. However, the appearance of Uzumaki Kushina had disrupted Araki's plans. At this particular point in time, Kushina had arrived in Konoha, and Araki knew very well what that meant. In the Ninja Academy, there was a very prominent classmate in his class named Namikaze Minato. Not long ago, Araki was calculating whether it was almost time for Kushina to transfer to his school. And now, she was standing right in front of him, deliberately avoiding contact with Namikaze Minato. He didn't want to get involved with the Nine Tails and risk revealing his wood-release abilities. But now, Kushina had moved into his bedroom and become his roommate. It wouldn't be long before Kushina replaced Mito and became the new Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. Headache. Just thinking about it gave him a headache. Araki stood at the door, staring blankly at Kushina. On the surface, he was looking at her, but inside, he was considering various strategies. However, he couldn't come up with any plan that he could execute. The most appropriate approach seemed to be to accept her first and then respond according to the situation. Kushina looked at the dumbfounded Araki and recalled the mental trauma that Bawako had mentioned. She also thought about her mission to save him. She pursed her lips and took a step forward, approaching Araki. Araki, hello, I'm Kushina. It's nice to meet you. From now on, we're friends. Kushina confidently extended her right hand, offering a handshake. Without Bawako around, she appeared calm and composed when facing Araki, even showing a hint of familiarity. Araki's face was filled with frustration. Helplessly, he mechanically extended his hand and shook hands with Kushina. From her posture, it seemed as if she was the owner of the room. She got comfortable way too quickly. Araki felt resigned but had no choice. If he had the option, he really wouldn't want to be friends with someone who brought so much trouble. Kushina Uzumaki. Araki simply shook hands with Kushina, his gaze slightly solemn as he quickly contemplated future strategies. For those who had watched the Naruto anime, he was well aware of what this young girl, who appeared to be under 10 years old, would experience in the future. From the current timeline, it was just the right time for Kushina to arrive in Konoha and become the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. And in the process, she would also be kidnapped by the Hidden Cloud Village shinobi. Not to mention the final night of the Nine Tails. Every event that occurred during this period caused a great uproar in Konoha. Even the protagonist of Naruto, Naruto Uzumaki, was Kushina's son, which showed how troublesome she was. Just thinking about it gave him a headache. Araki was well aware of his own situation. As a transmigrator, he obtained the wood-release Kekkei Genkai, which many shinobi in the ninja world coveted. However, he didn't have enough power to fully control it. If he accidentally exposed it, it would definitely not be a good thing for him. He originally planned to quietly train, gradually improving his physical abilities, and accumulating more chakra to gradually gain enough strength to protect himself. Until then, he would develop inconspicuously. After all, he was still young and couldn't do anything significant. He couldn't easily stand out, or else he would put himself in great danger. A wise man does not stand under a falling wall. With these thoughts in mind, Araki didn't say anything. After the brief handshake, he directly walked into the house, casually put down his backpack, and quickly left the room, leaving Kushina with a mysterious figure. Oh, what a strange person he is. Kushina stared at Araki, still in a daze, until he completely disappeared from her sight before regaining her senses. She had never encountered someone like him before. However, when Kushina thought about the possibility of this being her mission, an intriguing smile unconsciously appeared on her face, and her eyes were filled with great anticipation. She had a deep longing for what might happen in the future. Life in Konoha seems quite interesting. Kushina had already started imagining how to save her eccentric and seemingly autistic landlord. After Araki had distanced himself from his residence, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. The situation just now happened too suddenly, and the other person was none other than the wife of the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi. He didn't even have a chance to argue. This is too unfair. Araki had heard some conspiracy theories when watching Naruto in the past, but he didn't pay much attention to them. He thought that Konoha was truly a village filled with sunlight and that all its residents lived under the sun. But now, just because he exhibited some language and hearing difficulties, his only living space was rented out. Renting it out wasn't the problem, the issue was not receiving any rent. This was such a hassle. And to top it all off, it brought him a female roommate. And she was none other than Kushina Uzumaki. Araki felt a headache coming on just thinking about it. He walked step by step into a small forest in Konoha where there were few people, preparing for his running training. Hu. Araki adjusted his breathing and, in the process, performed some simple joint movements and basic warm-up exercises. Araki had learned a lot of knowledge in the ninja school, especially the theoretical knowledge related to ninjas. He understood that chakra consisted of both mental and physical energy. As the possessor of the wood-release Kekkei Genkei, Araki needed a vast amount of chakra to support the use of wood-release techniques. Mental energy was elusive for him, making it difficult to explain how to improve it. However, physical energy could be effectively increased by making the body stronger. This was the simplest, most direct, and most effective method. Araki knew that his late-night training activities might have already been detected by Hiruzen Sarutobi using his telescope technique since the latter had a habit of peeping around every night. But this kind of thing is nothing. It's just exercise. There are so many people in the village who exercise, and Araki is just insignificant among them. Araki's exercise routine is very simple, consisting of only two methods, running and swimming. He alternates between the two, running one day and swimming the next. Before his transmigration, Araki was a homebody who rarely exercised and didn't know any particularly scientific exercise methods. He could only rely on these primitive physical exercises. As for the training taught in the ninja school, it mainly focused on simple techniques, with little emphasis on the fundamentals of the body. When Araki studied the content of the ninja school textbooks, he couldn't help but sigh. In the ninja world, there is a high emphasis on offense and a low emphasis on defense. Part of the reason is that they prioritize attack power from childhood. After all, most of a ninja's time is spent on assassination and covert operations, always ready to sacrifice themselves for a mission. They would not hesitate to die in order to achieve their goals. Under such principles, focusing all their energy on improving their offensive capabilities allows them to more effectively carry out assassination missions. As for the life and death of ninjas, perhaps only their loved ones care more. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. After completing the basic warm-up and preparation, Araki began to run rapidly. Every muscle in his body was constantly stretching and contracting, and sweat uncontrollably poured out of his pores. The night quickly passed. With the rising sun, the sky was filled with burning red clouds, gradually dispelling the cold of the night as the temperature rose. After a night of running, Araki slowly walked towards his residence, dragging his exhausted body. The night had drained all his strength, leaving his body extremely tired. However, mentally, he felt exceptionally satisfied, experiencing a sense of great fulfillment. Just as Araki reached the entrance of his residence, he suddenly stopped in his tracks, his gaze fixed on the scene in front of him. A girl wearing a cute green dress with cartoon embroidery, hands on her hips, stood at his doorstep. Her red hair was tied into twin tails, adorned with 2 white butterfly hairpins, and she was cheerfully waving at him. This girl was none other than Kushina Uzumaki, who moved in yesterday. Araki, you're back. We should go to class. Kushina greeted him warmly, and on her left hand was Araki's school bag. After thinking all night, she vaguely realized that being assigned to live here by Sarutobi Bawako meant she could use her enthusiasm to heal this autistic boy who had been affected by the death of his parents. From now on, you're mine. Araki felt a bit uncomfortable seeing the scene before him. He had never encountered such a situation. Kushina, not far in front of him, was smiling and staring at him. Coupled with her still youthful and innocent cheeks, she exuded a sense of naivety and purity. It's time to go to school. Seeing Araki's silence, Kushina waved her hand again, speaking in a calm and patient tone, without any hint of impatience. You were waiting for me. Araki stammered deliberately, creating an appearance of someone who had difficulty speaking fluently, maintaining the persona he had built here. About 3 years ago, he came to Konoha as a transmigrator. He didn't receive any special gifts from the transmigration, nor did he have any system support. He didn't even have the memories of the original host. He only knew his name was Araki. In such a situation, he wasn't pretending to be foolish. It was because he couldn't understand the language and couldn't speak, due to the unfamiliar linguistic environment. He could only act as if he had been mentally affected. As time passed and after a period of adaptation, Araki gradually mastered the language and writing here. However, he realized that maintaining the current effect was also good. At this point in time, even though Araki was facing the nearly 9-year-old Kushina Uzumaki, he didn't dare to be careless. After all, the ninja world was very mature at a young age. Not only could children have puppy love, but they could also be sent to the battlefield. Araki was not clear about Kushina's true purpose for living here. It could be as simple as it appeared on the surface, just renting a place here to take advantage of him. Or there could be some special mission to test him. These things were still unclear. Regardless of the reason, Araki felt the need to be cautious and careful. The world of ninjas was filled with more conspiracies and tricks than he had imagined. Yeah, Kushina nodded in response, her 2 pigtails swaying and emitting a unique cute aura. I didn't get a chance to tell you yesterday. I'm a transfer student from another village. Today, I have to report to the ninja school. We're classmates and roommates, so naturally, we should go together. Kushina spoke with a radiant smile on her face, deliberately creating a warm and intimate atmosphere to bring them closer. There was a certain element of sympathy in her eyes. In her view, Araki was someone with a closed-off personality who needed her warmth to open the door to his heart. After all, she lived in Araki's house, and if she could heal the pain in his heart, it would be a way to repay him. Araki fell silent for a moment. In fact, he knew they were classmates, and Minato was in his class. It wouldn't take much deduction to figure that out. He had thought that Kushina didn't know these details, so he could use that as a reason to go separately. But what he didn't expect was, Kushina actually voluntarily mentioned that they were in the same class. It seemed that Minato had shared quite a bit of information with Kushina. However, at this moment, Kushina probably still didn't know that she was going to become the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. Araki quickly pondered many things in that instant. He vividly remembered that when he watched Naruto, Kushina had mentioned her past and said that she didn't know anything about the Nine Tails before coming to Konoha. It wasn't until the moment when the deadline for the Uzumaki clan's sealing technique was approaching and Minato was about to run out of time that they had a long conversation overnight and sealed the Nine Tails inside Kushina's body. At this moment, it's quite dangerous. Setting aside whether Kushina has any other special missions, even if everything appears as it seems on the surface, it won't be long before Kushina becomes the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. If Araki gets too close to Kushina, it won't be a good thing for him. But now they're already roommates. If he suddenly acts distant, it will attract attention. He needs to find the right balance. Alright, Kushina didn't know that Araki had contemplated many things about her during his silence. She thought that Araki's mental issue had caused his vacant state and her smile became even more gentle, her voice softer. Don't worry. With me around, no one will bully you. Kushina patted her still flat chest to reassure him. From her tone, she had a demeanor akin to an older sister. When she was bored, she imagined a child with a withdrawn personality like Araki facing bullying from peers at the ninja school. Perhaps because of this, Araki would go out to train at night, trying to improve his strength to protect himself. Quote. A bunch of question marks floated above Araki's head. He had no idea what Kushina was thinking. But he could clearly sense that Kushina's words were sincere and not an act. Why? Araki asked in confusion. He knew that in this world, there was no hatred without reason, and no love without reason. Unexpected displays of goodwill always had underlying motives. If he didn't know the exact reason, he felt uneasy. Because we're friends. When Kushina smiled, her eyes curved like crescent moons, complementing her twin-tailed hairstyle, making her look quite adorable. She waved her fair little hand in front of Araki. We shook hands, right? After shaking hands, you became my friend. You're the first friend I made after coming to Konoha. Of course, I won't let anyone bully you. Friends help each other, right? You provided me a place to stay, and I'll protect you. From now on, you're mine. Kushina continued speaking one sentence after another, seemingly afraid that Araki wouldn't understand. Each word was spoken slowly and enunciated clearly. Her radiant eyes were fixed on Araki, without any flickering or hesitation. The initially created warmth gradually transformed into genuine enthusiasm. Quote. Araki was moved when he heard the earlier words. After coming to the ninja world, he had closed off his social interactions. Even when the language barrier decreased later on, he didn't have the inclination to make friends. But, now suddenly, there was a roommate who happened to be the famous Kushina Uzumaki from Naruto. And she claimed they were friends. That was fine. But the following words started to sound more and more absurd. Although children often speak without filter, he wasn't truly a child in essence. Why did these words sound somewhat suspicious to him? Elbow, come inside with me. Araki, let's go. It's my first day of school, and I don't want to be late. Kushina urged the dumbfounded Araki. Her words were urging, but her tone remained gentle. Since arriving in Konoha yesterday, her heart was filled with anticipation for her interaction with Araki, the ninja school, and their future life. Do you really consider me a friend? Araki asked hesitantly. His gaze shifted towards Kushina, and from her emotional fluctuations, there were no signs of lies, nor did it seem like she was testing him. Perhaps, Kushina really was just staying in his house. However, after their first encounter, Kushina showed a desire to protect him, which surprised him. It was different from what he had imagined. Yeah, Kushina nodded without hesitation. She was still innocent and naive. She hadn't experienced any unfair treatment in Uzushiogakure, so everything she saw in Konoha was still beautiful to her. In that case, Araki took a deep breath. He wanted to quietly live in Konoha, avoiding any trouble. But the fact that he and Kushina were roommates had already been decided, and many things between them were intertwined. Araki looked around the corridor. There was no one there for the moment, so it was relatively safe, but it wasn't the place for conversation. Come with me to the room. Araki took the lead and walked towards Kushina. He slightly bowed and took the bag from her hand, quickly opening the door and entering the room. I have something to tell you. The whole process was swift and without any hesitation. Kushina's eyes were filled with curiosity, not understanding what Araki had in mind. She was momentarily unaware that Araki had become fluent in speaking. After a brief moment of confusion, Kushina quickly caught up and entered the room. As soon as she entered, Araki closed the door with light and careful movements, without making much noise. Kushina, if you truly consider me a friend, then you must agree to 3 things, or else I won't come near you or speak to you again. Araki's face was serious, his gaze intense. After 3 years of silence in Konoha, he rarely revealed his ability to communicate normally. This wasn't hasty or careless. When Araki was at the door just now, he considered many possibilities and felt that this was the most confident approach. Araki was well aware that avoiding such situations wasn't a solution. It would only keep him in a passive state. Only by taking the initiative could he possibly change the situation. Of course, there was one more thing. In Araki's view, revealing a small ability to speak to Kushina wasn't a serious matter. According to his principles, he could show a third of his true strength. He couldn't be regarded as useless, but he also needed some leeway. Being in this middle ground where he wasn't outstanding but also not overlooked was the least attention-grabbing state for an ordinary person. Being too dazzling or too inconspicuous would bring inconvenience. What things? Kushina was completely drawn in by Araki's words. Her curiosity was fully aroused, and she still overlooked the fact that Araki could speak. After all, her interactions with Araki had been limited, and she hadn't formed a proper understanding of him yet, so she hadn't broken through that initial shock. If it were another student from the ninja school, they might have shown exaggerated surprise upon hearing Araki speak because they had hardly interacted with him at all. Kushina's attention was focused on the 3 things Araki mentioned. She had already decided to become friends with Araki, or rather, to rescue him from his secluded and introverted state. This sense of righteousness, akin to saving the world, filled her still naive heart. The first thing is that apart from you and me, you can't tell anyone else that we live together, let alone reveal our relationship. Once we step out of this door, we act as if we don't know each other. Araki's face was filled with seriousness as he brought up what he considered the most important matter, that nobody else should know about their relationship, which would mean they had no connection between them. By doing so, many troubles would not fall upon him. No way. To Araki's surprise, Kushina gave an almost spontaneous response, shaking her head like a tambourine, and her twin ponytails swung back and forth, making her look incredibly cute. Araki was taken aback. He had just stated the first condition and was immediately rejected. This was not going smoothly at all. The only leverage he had to threaten Kushina was to become friends. If this didn't work, if Kushina decided to reveal their relationship, then he would have no choice. The previous conditions are acceptable, but we can't pretend we don't know each other. After we step out of this door, I can treat you as an ordinary friend. Kushina explained. Deep down, her goal was to heal Araki's seclusion. When she saw Araki communicating with her just now, for a brief moment, she thought his mental issues might not be so severe. But now, she realized the gravity of the problem. Agreeing to pretend not to know each other just to be friends, can they really be considered friends if they don't recognize each other outside? This logic was contradictory. Kushina instinctively felt that she couldn't agree to such a condition. The prerequisite had to be friendship. However, she didn't have any objections to the other aspects. It wouldn't be a bad thing if they didn't reveal they lived together outside. Fine, I guess. Araki's mood immediately eased a bit. Being ordinary friends on the surface was acceptable for now. There wasn't much room for negotiation given the current circumstances. If others didn't know they lived together, it would help avoid many troubles. But being ordinary friends, it sounded strange. If they acted like ordinary friends in front of others, did that mean they weren't ordinary friends when they were alone? As Araki pondered over these thoughts, he quickly dismissed the drifting thoughts from his mind. It wasn't the time to dwell on such trivial matters. Now, the second thing. Araki took a deep breath. Since the first condition didn't go so smoothly, he approached the second matter cautiously. Konoha is more dangerous than you imagine. You mustn't stand out too much or say anything arrogant. Don't make too many enemies for yourself. As someone from an outside village, it won't benefit you to do so when trying to integrate into the village. After finishing that statement, Araki was afraid that Kushina would interject, so he quickly added another sentence. Especially, don't say anything about wanting to become the Hokage or anything like that. What a weird guy. Kushina blinked her eyes and stared at Araki, who seemed serious. Her beautiful eyebrows slightly furrowed but quickly relaxed. So, this is the reason for his seclusion. Because of his parents' sacrifice, he perceives the outside world as extremely dangerous and hides himself within a protective shell. If she wasn't his roommate, he wouldn't say these things to her. Perhaps, it's only by isolating himself like this that he can feel a sense of safety. Okay. Kushina nodded. In that instant, she pondered over many things, all related to Araki. In her innocent and pure heart, she believed that Araki's words stemmed from a certain degree of paranoid delusion. Living here itself carries a responsibility to help Araki. The best course of action now is not to argue with Araki about these matters. Instead, she should initially go along with his words, allowing him to feel a sense of security, and then gradually bring about change. However, Kushina agreed verbally, but in her heart, she disagreed. In her understanding, Konoha could be considered the safest village. It had beautiful scenery, and the residents were friendly and harmonious. Where was the danger? That's where the problem lies. If she didn't judge incorrectly. This is the root cause of Araki's seclusion. A trace of uncontrollable contemplation appeared on Kushina's still immature face. She quickly assessed Araki's situation in her mind, like a doctor diagnosing a patient, and made a precise diagnosis based on her own understanding. Psychological disorders like this are often triggered by trauma. Araki may have lost his sense of security due to the death of his parents, leading him to perceive the entire world as extremely dangerous. No, not just a possibility. It must be. After realizing this, Kushina's mood became much more at ease. She had found the key to rescuing Araki in the future. What's the third thing? Kushina's lovely smile reappeared on her face, and her tone once again became gentle. Araki's demeanor somehow made her inexplicably feel a little heartache. Well, Araki took note of Kushina's reaction. He wasn't sure what kind of mental process the girl had gone through, but everything seemed to be going smoother than expected. Kushina agreed too easily. It made Araki feel somewhat unreal. In his impression, Kushina wasn't someone who easily compromised. She often got into fights at the ninja academy and had a stubborn personality. However, the double ponytail version of Kushina in front of him didn't seem as impulsive. He always felt a sense of perfunctoriness. But reaching this point was enough to avoid many unnecessary troubles. The third thing is that you must never, under any circumstances, talk about anything concerning me to anyone else, no matter what you see or guess in the future, Araki said in a deep voice. This was the most important thing to him. He didn't know how long Kushina would be staying here. A few days, a few months, or a few years. In any case, after spending a long time together, many issues would inevitably come to the surface. It wasn't an easy task to completely conceal his abilities, especially since he often trained at night, which wasn't something a normal person would do. Sooner or later, Kushina might see something or have her own speculations. Araki didn't want to hide all those years of hard work, only to have Kushina, his roommate, expose everything in the end. No problem. Kushina readily agreed without any hesitation. She didn't think it was a big deal, especially after figuring out the underlying issue. In her eyes, Araki's instructions were still about the same problem. Paranoia. The stimulation caused by the death of his parents had triggered a sense of panic towards the world, making him believe that danger lurked everywhere in the village. Such a mindset couldn't be reasoned with. To gradually relax his heart and provide him with the missing sense of security, that was what Kushina believed was needed regarding Araki's situation. You agreed just like that. Araki initially thought the following two conditions wouldn't go so smoothly for Kushina, but his judgment seemed to be off. Nevertheless, as long as the objective was achieved, the process didn't matter as much. Let's go to class. Araki glanced at the clock on the wall. Their conversation hadn't taken up much time, and they wouldn't be late if they left now. During his time at the Ninja Academy, Araki had never been late, never violated any rules or regulations, and never had any conflicts with other students. He did his best to avoid drawing attention to himself. Those days were probably coming to an end. He knew it well. This was the difference between ideals and reality. Once he established a relationship with Kushina, even if he tried to withdraw and avoid trouble, it would eventually find him. For now, he needed to stabilize the situation. The most pressing matter was to improve his own strength as much as possible. 3 years of hard training had greatly enhanced his physical fitness, giving him some confidence when facing situations that weren't overly dangerous. Great. Kushina's face was filled with smiles. She had long admired the Ninja Academy in Konoha, and now that she had reached an agreement with Araki, her inner anticipation reached an uncontrollable level. Araki didn't say anything more. He picked up his bag and walked out of the room, taking the lead. He deliberately quickened his pace, creating a slight distance between him and Kushina. The sense of distance was just right. It ensured that he remained within Kushina's sight, playing the role of a guide, while not making others think they were familiar with each other. What a weird guy. Shaking her head, Kushina quietly followed behind Araki, maintaining the distance he had created and not trying to catch up forcefully. Her gaze remained fixed on Araki's figure, staring at his back with a pensive expression in her beautiful eyes. Araki's back looked quite good. Perhaps due to his regular training, when seen from a distance, his clothes subtly highlighted his broad shoulders and slender waistline. For a moment, Kushina felt that Araki was mysterious. This feeling inexplicably crept into her mind, arousing a desire to explore. Among the people she had known before, if someone had any skills, they would want the whole world to know and receive praise from everyone. But this person seemed to be the opposite. It was a type she had never encountered before. Even though she knew Araki had experienced a severe mental shock, it still sparked her intense curiosity. What is your dream? Araki and Kushina, one in front and one behind, maintained a relatively fixed position, almost moving at the same frequency and pace. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the gate of the Ninja Academy. It's so beautiful. Kushina's eyes lit up with excitement as she scanned the Ninja Academy. She had been here yesterday and had a preliminary impression, but now she was a student of the academy, and her emotions were bubbling with excitement. Among all the ninja villages in the entire ninja world, many had established ninja academies, taking after Konoha. However, no other village's ninja academy could compare to Konoha's. It could be said that it was the best ninja academy in the world. Just the thought of it was thrilling. Kushina's gaze swept across the elegantly designed school building, moved to the grassy field of the training grounds, and finally settled on the swings nestled among the trees. Everywhere was pleasing to the eye, and stepping into it brought a sense of tranquility. Kushina didn't keep admiring the scenery of the Ninja Academy. She knew this would be her school in the future, and there would be plenty of time to savor it slowly. Following Araki's footsteps closely, Kushina entered the classroom. They were classmates, so their classroom was the same. Kushina stood at the entrance of the classroom and quickly scanned the room, which made her freeze on the spot. Then, she looked again. Just now, she had caught sight of Araki in the corner of the classroom, near the window at the back row. Once she spotted Araki, she felt relieved, knowing she hadn't lost him. At the same time, a strange emotion welled up inside her. Kushina muttered silently in her mind. She had initially intended to sit next to Araki, but then she remembered their agreement. It's better to maintain some distance in front of others. On the first day of their interaction, she couldn't burden this person, who had undergone emotional trauma, with too much psychological pressure. It wouldn't be conducive to subsequent healing. Unconsciously, Kushina placed herself in the perspective of a doctor, with Araki being the patient she cared about. Thinking of this, Kushina directly went to sit in an empty area on the other side of the classroom. This seat was a bit further back from Araki's position, just enough to have him within her sight, allowing her to observe his every move. After Kushina arrived in the classroom, there wasn't much time left before the start of class. Most of the students had already arrived, and her presence drew the attention of almost everyone in the class. It wasn't just because she was a new student, but also because of her red hair, which was undeniably eye-catching. Furthermore, the students in the Ninja Academy were mostly children from Konoha. They had already known each other before attending school. A small circle had formed among them. It had been years since a transfer student arrived, so it was as if a new person had entered the established circle, inevitably attracting attention. Look, there's a new person. Her hair is actually red. Why did someone suddenly appear? She looks round-faced, like a tomato. Quote. The students whispered among themselves, and some of their voices, albeit faint, reached Kushina's ears. Kushina furrowed her eyebrows slightly and felt somewhat displeased, especially when she heard many people referring to her as a tomato. However, she suddenly remembered Araki's words. She shouldn't stand out too much. She shouldn't say anything arrogant. She shouldn't create too many enemies for herself. If it weren't for Araki, perhaps she would have directly confronted these children and not tolerate any nonsense. But now, she thought about continuing to be friends with Araki, so she decided not to do anything that would make him uncomfortable. Just pretend you didn't hear anything. After all, they are just children. In that instant, Kushina sorted out her emotions. Although she felt somewhat uncomfortable, she was more concerned about Araki, who seemed to disappear in silence, than about those people in the classroom who casually gave nicknames to others. Tap, tap, tap. At that moment, a series of footsteps could be heard, followed by a man wearing the attire of a Konoha village ninja entering the classroom. This person was the teacher in charge of their class, Yinsui. Cough, cough, cough. Teacher Yinsui lightly coughed, instantly capturing the attention of the students in the classroom, and the murmurs ceased as well. Before we begin today's class, I have an announcement to make. Yinsui's voice was serious and solemn, devoid of any expression, effectively controlling the atmosphere in the room. Yinsui was satisfied with the response from the students in the class, especially how they became completely quiet when he spoke, which gave him a sense of pride and accomplishment. Why don't you introduce yourself? Yinsui's gaze focused on Kushina, nodding at her, indicating that she should come forward and speak. Kushina stood up confidently from her seat, looked towards the front of the classroom, and then stepped forward. As she took her first step, she subtly glanced in Araki's direction and happened to catch him looking back at her. At that moment when their gazes met, she seemed to receive a message from Araki. Don't stand out too much. This thought sprouted in Kushina's mind. With firm steps, she walked up to the podium. Hello, everyone. My name is Uzumaki Kushina. I moved from another village to Konoha village, and I'm not very familiar with it yet. I hope you'll all take care of me in the future. After finishing her words, Kushina deeply bowed to the students in front of her, presenting herself in a humble manner that immediately garnered some goodwill from many people. Then, Kushina prepared to step down from the podium and return to her seat. But at that moment, she was stopped by teacher Yinsui, who asked her to stay. Today, the topic of our class is. Yinsui lightly placed his left hand on Kushina's shoulder, gesturing for her to stay for a while. The lines on his face softened, and there was a hint of incomplete smile, giving him a kinder appearance. What is your dream? Yinsui's voice spread to every corner of the classroom, clear and audible to everyone, including Araki, who sat in the classroom with no presence. Everyone has dreams, no matter how big or small. We must give our all for our dreams. Yinsui then turned his gaze towards Kushina. Kushina, let's start with you. What is your dream? Namikaze Minato. Swish. Almost in an instant, all the eyes in the class fell on Kushina, including Araki, who had no presence. This scene immediately stirred up a surge of passion in Kushina's heart. She wanted to say something arrogant to avoid being looked down upon by the people here. But at that moment, Araki's instructions echoed in her mind once again. My dream is. Kushina took a deep breath, trying to calm her emotions as much as possible. She tightly clenched her fists, keeping the initial dream that arose in her heart hidden, without directly stating it. Instead, she said something that might make the students in the class more receptive. I want to be friends with you, all of you. As Kushina spoke these words, her voice gradually rose. Especially before saying, all of you, she emphasized the word, you. Others might not understand the meaning behind it, but she knew it clearly in her heart, who it referred to. Once these words were spoken, silence filled the classroom. Apologetic expressions appeared on the faces of the students. Not long ago, they were all mocking Kushina's red hair and harboring some exclusionary feelings towards the girl who mysteriously joined their class. But now, those emotions dissipated as Kushina expressed her desire to be friends with them. The corner at the back of the classroom. Araki nodded silently. At this moment, Kushina had completed her self-introduction and smoothly returned to her seat without causing any significant reaction, unlike in the original timeline. To some extent, the conversation between him and Kushina quietly changed the course of ninja history. Although it seemed insignificant, it had a tangible impact. Not bad, Araki silently praised in his mind. Now Kushina was living in his house, a fact that the students in the class were unaware of at the moment. However, it wasn't a secret that needed to be kept hidden. Sooner or later, they would find out. It was only a matter of time. If it can be delayed for a while, then let it be delayed. However, Araki knew in his heart that Kushina was beautiful and would undoubtedly attract attention. Such a thing couldn't be hidden. In the previous course of history, many male students in the class bullied Kushina. Deep down, they knew that their actions were nothing more than an attempt to gain her attention. In their logic, the more they liked a girl, the more they would bully her, using it as a simple and direct way to get noticed. Once the people in the class found out that Kushina was living in his house, Araki didn't know what kind of troubles would arise, but one thing he was certain of was that he and Kushina were now bound together in many things. The less trouble Kushina encountered, the less trouble he would have. To have a little less trouble was already a low requirement for Araki. Namikaze Minato, it's your turn. What is your dream? The voice of teacher Yinsui reverberated in the classroom, drawing the attention of the students once again. Almost everyone's gaze fell on Namikaze Minato. After Kushina stated her dream, and entered the time for each student to answer, for ordinary students, saying these words often made them nervous, without actually gaining much attention from others. But when it was Namikaze Minato's turn, the students in the class once again focused their attention. He wasn't an ordinary student. Namikaze Minato was the top student in the class. Anything the teacher taught, he would understand in one go, especially in ninjutsu, where his proficiency far surpassed his peers. According to everyone's saying, Namikaze Minato could have graduated early, but for some reason, he had chosen to stay and continue studying at the ninja school. He had no trace of arrogance and always wore a gentle smile on his face, giving people a very comfortable feeling. I hope to become a great Hokage recognized by the people of the village. Namikaze Minato raised his right hand, clenched it into a fist, and held it up to his chest in a dignified manner. His face displayed a standard warm smile, giving off a very comforting feeling. Wow! As Namikaze Minato spoke, the classroom instantly buzzed with excitement. The classmates quietly discussed Namikaze Minato, their eyes filled with envy. When someone's strength is stronger than yours, it may evoke feelings of disdain and a sour taste in your heart. It might even give rise to jealousy and resentment. However, when that person's strength reaches an unreachable level, it only generates admiration and worship. The difference between envy and admiration lies in the magnitude of the gap. In the hearts of his classmates, Namikaze Minato was in a league of his own, beyond reach. As a student in the class, he seemed misplaced, an overwhelming force that they couldn't even begin to compare with. To become the Hokage, if someone else had said those words, it would only invite ridicule. After all, among the children of Konoha, at least 9 out of 10 aspire to become Hokage. It is almost a shared dream among them. But they don't talk about it openly because dreams are just dreams, and some dreams are impossible to fulfill in this lifetime. However, when Namikaze Minato said those words, they didn't perceive it as unrealistic. They even felt that it was highly probable. Among their generation, there was no one who could be compared to Namikaze Minato. On the other side at the back of the classroom, Kushina's gaze focused on Namikaze Minato's blonde hair. HMPH. Kushina let out a cold snort in her heart. Becoming Hokage was her dream and goal too. Since their aspirations were the same, it meant they were destined to be competitors. There can only be one Hokage. If the other person takes the seat, there won't be a place for her. Kushina didn't express her true thoughts to take care of Araki's emotions, but it didn't stop her from seeing Namikaze Minato as an enemy at this moment. People with some skills are always hoping to have the whole world revolve around them. Through the reactions of the students, Kushina faintly guessed that Namikaze Minato might be the strongest in the class, similar to the peers she had known before. Once they had a little bit of talent, they couldn't help but show it off. But in this regard, they were far less composed than Araki. With this thought in mind, Kushina's gaze turned to Araki, the figure that hardly caught anyone's attention. In her eyes, he shimmered with a mysterious aura, arousing even more curiosity to delve deeper into the secrets within him. Araki's dream. The exclamation in the classroom lasted for quite some time before gradually quieting down. Almost every student knew that Namikaze Minato wanted to become the Hokage of Konoha, but knowing it was one thing, hearing it directly from Namikaze Minato was another. At this moment, everyone truly understood Namikaze Minato's ambition, and unconsciously, their gazes towards him had changed. Even Yinsui-sensei, who asked the question, looked at Namikaze Minato with eyes filled with admiration and appreciation. After all, to have taught a student like him was something worth boasting about for a lifetime. After asking a few more students in succession, Yinsui-sensei's gaze focused on Araki in the corner. Araki, what is your dream? Yinsui-sensei asked, displaying a slightly different demeanor than before. There was even a hint of hesitation in his expression. I have to say, even Yinsui-sensei found Araki to be a tough nut to crack. In the past, whenever it came to asking Araki a question, his reaction was like opening a blind box. When things were going well, he answered instantly, just like a top student. But when things weren't going well, it was as if he didn't understand the question at all. To the point that even from a teacher's perspective, unless there was a specific reason, they wouldn't deliberately approach Araki. The uncertainty he brought was too strong. This time, when Araki was called upon, it didn't catch the attention of any other students. The people in the classroom continued doing their own things. Those who had already answered began thinking about other matters or taking a break. Those who hadn't answered were mentally rehearsing their responses, thinking about how to answer quickly. No one paid any attention to how Araki would respond. However, something unexpected happened this time. Kushina, who had just transferred into the class, showed no interest when she heard about other people's dreams. After all, she didn't know any of these people, so listening was pointless, and she couldn't remember who was who. But when it came to Araki, Kushina's neck suddenly straightened, and her red twin tails bounced up and down twice. Her eyes, full of anticipation and curiosity, were fixed on Araki. She had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Araki's expression remained unchanged. Just like the other students waiting to be questioned, he had already figured out how to answer such a question. From the moment he saw Kushina, he knew the progression of the class and that they would eventually reach the stage of asking about dreams. Dreams are elusive things. If one speaks too grandly, they will be accused of aiming too high and being unrealistic. But if one speaks too modestly, they will be seen as lacking ambition. Araki wouldn't fully reveal his abilities, as that would attract more attention. Similarly, he wouldn't completely hide his abilities, as that would also draw the attention of some people. Only by keeping himself at a moderate level at all times could he blend in with the crowd. The same principle applies to dreams. Dreaming too big or too small will both attract attention. Just like Namikaze Minato now, everyone in the class remembers his dream of becoming the Hokage. My dream is to become a medical ninja. Araki slowly spoke in a hesitant and somewhat awkward tone. This manner of speaking has been his presentation to everyone since he just learned the language here and hasn't quite mastered smooth expression yet, resulting in this effect. In reality, during his time at the ninja school, Araki has gradually made progress in his language skills. However, this progress is not particularly noticeable, to the point that many people still have the impression of him struggling with language barriers. This is the label Araki wants to gradually erase. Just as his way of navigating here, he doesn't stand out too much, nor does he fall too far behind. He exists on a level among the average people because this level of individuals is often the largest and least likely to be noticed. The language barrier that Araki exhibited before, to some extent, drew some attention to him. However, at that time, Araki had no choice. He really couldn't speak, and even if he wanted to express himself, he simply couldn't. It wasn't much different from a language barrier. Upon hearing Araki's words, Kushina's beautiful eyes instantly sparkled, and various possibilities began to form in her mind. Perhaps, there's a chance, it could be like that. Kushina's thoughts quickly diverged in her mind. At her current age, she had a rich imagination and enjoyed indulging in wild ideas, especially when encountering such a peculiar person. Actually, even before Araki spoke, Kushina was already imagining what kind of dream such a person might have. It wouldn't be wanting to become the Hokage, right? or simply living a mediocre life. Or perhaps he also wants to make friends with more people. Kushina considered many possibilities. This guessing game made her feel strongly engaged and even more curious about Araki's dream. It was precisely because of this. She was greatly shocked when she heard Araki say that his dream was to become a medical ninja. It was something she had never expected. Why? In a timely manner, teacher Yinsui asked the question. Not only Kushina, but even the teacher himself hadn't anticipated Araki saying something like that. The students in the class didn't pay any attention to the situation. In fact, they didn't care about Araki's dream or anything related to it. It had nothing to do with them. However, as a teacher, Yinsui felt quite surprised and decided to ask another question. Because Araki didn't feel surprised at all about Yinsui's follow-up question. Even before he spoke these words, he had anticipated that he might be asked. After all, when the previous students answered the question, some of them expressed contrasting dreams, and Yinsui had asked them why. I don't want to let more people lose their parents. As Araki spoke, his eyes grew dim. By using this approach, he wanted to remind teacher Yinsui and those who were paying attention to him that he had experienced the pain of losing his parents. That's why he appeared the way he did, and it wasn't anything special that needed attention. Yinsui pursed his lips, silently nodded, and lowered his gaze, suppressing the admiration in his eyes. He didn't make further eye contact with Araki and looked at the next person instead. After Araki's response, he didn't express anything more. It's enough to understand many things in one's heart. Appreciation at this moment might become a weapon that harms this child. Let the pain gradually drift away with the wind. There will always be a day to move forward. Kushina's beautiful eyes contracted in an instant. After hearing Araki's explanation, she felt a sense of broad-mindedness and compassion. It was precisely because his parents sacrificed themselves during a mission that he wanted to become a medical ninja, to prevent others from experiencing the same tragedy and becoming like he is now. His dream may not be grand, but it is meaningful. At that moment, Kushina's gaze toward Araki underwent a subtle change. She suddenly had a feeling that this peer named Araki was like a cryptic and profound book. Initially, when she started reading it, she only had a peculiar feeling. But as she delved deeper into understanding, she gradually discovered the mysteries within. No wonder he warned me not to make enemies. It must mean that he really considers me a friend. He doesn't want me, an outsider from a different village, to experience the loneliness of having no friends like he does. Or perhaps, he wants me to have more friends. Or maybe he feels. Kushina's thoughts multiplied and grew more complex. She stared at Araki's lonely figure and inexplicably felt a pang of sympathy. The Black Shadow. Amidst the questioning of teacher Yinsui, the class quickly came to an end without much reaction, as if everything went according to everyone's expectations. On the surface, Araki didn't leave much of an impression and seemed disinterested in everything, but in reality, he listened attentively to everyone's dreams. Know thyself, know thy enemy, and you shall prevail in 100 battles. Of course, Araki's intention in understanding these circumstances was not to antagonize the students in his class, but rather to have a basic understanding to better handle any future situations with ease. At the same time, at this current point in time, Araki also realized that the course of history in Konoha village had changed. Having traversed 3 years to arrive at this point, he had no desire to stir up trouble. He simply hoped to steadily improve his strength. Once he fully mastered Mokuten would release, it would mean he had attained a certain level of self-defense capability. However, this didn't mean Araki would come forward just because he had mastered Mokuten. As someone who understood the history and background of the Naruto world, he knew that various significant events would continue to unfold in Konoha village and the ninja world. Behind these events, There were formidable beings with great power. A slight misstep could cost him his life. At the very least, he felt he shouldn't willingly put himself in a passive situation. Ignorance often breeds fearlessness. Someone like Araki, who understood the subsequent events, approached matters with even greater caution. Ring, ring, ring. Accompanied by the sound of the dismissal bell, another day of classes came to an end. As usual, Araki didn't be the first one to leave the classroom. Doing so would attract attention if he did it for too long. It was best to blend in with the crowd and appear completely ordinary. After waiting for a while inside the classroom, Araki immediately noticed something unusual. Normally, many students would leave the classroom at this time, but they didn't. Instead, they gathered around Kushina. Is it starting already? Araki's brow furrowed slightly. Based on what he had seen in Naruto, the students in the class might start causing trouble for Kushina now. Araki didn't want such a situation to occur. If he had no connection with Kushina in the past, he could simply ignore everything that happened. But, now, Kushina was living in his house. They could be considered roommates. This created some bonds between the two of them. Apart from that, Kushina's attitude towards him was quite friendly, which made Araki feel a bit uneasy. Actually, Araki hoped that Kushina would be more aggressive in her approach towards him. Be a bit more unreasonable. That way, when faced with situations concerning Kushina, he could simply pretend not to have seen them. Kushina, hello, my name is Inoichi Yamanaka. Choza Akamichi. I'm Shikaku Nara. Quote. The students gathered around Kushina one after another, each wearing a friendly expression. Almost all of them came to make friends. After seeing the scene in front of him, Araki was slightly surprised at first, but then he quickly understood. Due to the change in Kushina's dream, the story in this place had already deviated. Even if he tried to keep a low profile, he was like a butterfly flapping its wings, causing the butterfly effect in the ninja world. In the original story, as an outsider who came to this village, Kushina's somewhat arrogant words had stirred up dissatisfaction among many people. Coupled with her somewhat rough handling, her relationship with her classmates was not good. But now, at this moment, Kushina had a different expression. She expressed her desire to make friends with everyone, and naturally, the students here were willing to be friends with such a lovely girl. That's good. Araki nodded subtly. This would save a lot of unnecessary trouble and alleviate his concerns. Then, Araki stood up, grabbed his backpack, and walked towards the classroom door. He was ready to leave. At that moment, Kushina's gaze immediately focused on Araki. She wanted to catch up to him, but there were too many students surrounding her, making it impossible for her to leave. She was a new student, and everyone who gathered around here introduced themselves, but she didn't remember any of their names. She felt lost in this situation and couldn't just leave too hastily. Before she could react, Araki had already left the classroom. Oh dear, really, Kushina muttered to herself in her heart, knowing that she couldn't catch up to Araki anymore. She decided not to dwell on it and patiently interacted with the students present. After all, they would be classmates in the future. Araki threw his backpack back into the room and went to train in the forest. Today's events gave him great inspiration. In the past 3 years, he had tried to integrate himself into the village of Konoha as much as possible, appearing ordinary and avoiding any trouble. He originally thought he could quietly accumulate strength like this. After all, the Second Great Ninja War was already more than halfway over. The battles between Tsunade, Jiraiya, Orochimaru, and Hanzo had ended, and the reputation of the 3 Konoha Sannin had spread throughout the ninja world. The war was coming to an end, and the village would soon enter a rare period of peace. But Kushina's sudden appearance seemed like a warning bell to him. Many things wouldn't develop as he had anticipated. Change often happens faster than planned, and without strong power, there would not be enough capability to handle unexpected situations. In these 3 years, Araki had never slackened a single day. But now he understood that it wasn't enough. He had to train even harder and further increase the speed of his strength growth. Thinking of this, Araki delved deeper into the forest and started running at high speed. His body was agile, and he moved incredibly fast, capable of performing incredible actions without using chakra. On the other side, after dealing with the relationships between her classmates, Kushina slowly walked back to her residence. That annoying Araki, he just left me behind. Kushina clenched her small fists and said angrily. Although she spoke that way, she didn't actually harbor any dislike for Araki in her heart. Not long after, she returned to her place. Vaguely, she saw a figure standing at the door. Araki. A flicker of doubt appeared in Kushina's eyes as she asked tentatively. After asking the question, she already had the answer in her heart. The person in front of her was definitely not Araki, as Araki wasn't that tall. Shimura Danzo, you're not Araki. Uzumaki Kushina immediately realized that the person in front of her was someone she had never seen before. In an instant, an inexplicable sense of fear enveloped her heart. Her first instinct was to escape from this place. She could sense that the person in front of her had come for her. Uzumaki Kushina, come with me. I have something important to tell you. A calm and hoarse voice slowly echoed, accompanied by a steady tone that showed no emotional fluctuations. The figure still stood in the shadows, blending with the darkness, making it impossible to make out even the basic features. In this environment, Kushina's heart was filled with intense unease. She couldn't convince herself not to be afraid. The person directly mentioned her name. So, it was obvious. The person had come for her. Kushina's mind immediately started to think. She didn't know many people in Konoha, and the person in front of her didn't seem like a classmate she had just met at the ninja school. Who are you? Kushina gently shifted her feet and slowly stepped backward, her beautiful eyes filled with seriousness, and her heart pounding in her chest. At this moment, she had conflicting thoughts. She desperately wanted Araki to appear and rescue her from this crisis, but at the same time, she hoped Araki wouldn't show up to avoid getting involved in this dangerous situation. Let me introduce myself. The shadow still spoke in that steady tone, taking a step forward from the darkness. With each step, there was a clinking sound, and after a few steps, it was revealed that the person leaned on a cane in their left hand, as if their legs weren't as agile. My name is. The figure emerged from the darkness, revealing a middle-aged man with black hair dressed in a dark green robe. However, unlike an ordinary man, the right half of his face and his body were wrapped in thick white bandages. Shimura Danzo. The middle-aged man introduced himself with a name that Kushina had never heard before. If Araki were here, he would definitely be cautious and try to avoid him. As someone who has watched Naruto, Araki knows very well the position Danzo holds in Konoha. Araki had been in Konoha for 3 years and never encountered Danzo. He never expected that Kushina would meet Danzo on her second night here. Do you have something to discuss? Kushina's cautious gaze focused on Danzo as he emerged from the shadows. She carefully moved her feet backward, trying to create some distance between them that had been closing in. I'm going to take you to meet someone. Danzo's exposed left eye surveyed Kushina, particularly lingering on her red hair. His gaze gave her a strange feeling. It was as if he wasn't looking at a living person but rather a human-shaped tool, with no difference from looking at an object. I won't go. Kushina shook her head almost without hesitation. She had no idea what she would be facing, but the thought of being taken away filled her with a deep sense of fear. The unknown was too terrifying. You don't have a choice in this matter. As soon as Danzo finished speaking, he swiftly moved and appeared in front of Kushina. Then, He reached out and grabbed her wrist, as if lifting a small animal, and took Kushina away. Araki was sprinting through the forest, his forehead covered in sweat. The intense training he pursued every day made him feel fulfilled. He didn't even consider Danzo's existence. He had no idea that Danzo had appeared at his doorstep and taken Kushina away. If he knew, he would definitely stay even farther away. Are you kidding? That's Danzo we're talking about. If that old schemer found out he could use wood release, he would meet a gruesome end. Let someone else handle the heroics of saving damsels in distress. Araki hoped he wouldn't be dragged down. Only when he felt there was no risk involved and it was necessary to intervene would he consider taking action. The next day, in the early morning, when Araki returned to his doorstep, he saw a tired-looking Kushina. She was sitting huddled at the entrance, holding his school bag in her hands. Her eyes were vacant and hazy, as if burdened with a heavy heart. What happened? Araki frowned. Even if he wasn't particularly perceptive, he could tell that something was off with Kushina's state. What's going on? Wasn't I just gone for one night? Why does it seem like something serious happened? Her mental state. It feels a bit off. Araki. Just then, Kushina suddenly raised her head. Her face, buried between her knees, emerged. It was pale and devoid of color, with dark circles under her bloodshot eyes. The previous innocence and cheerfulness had completely disappeared, replaced by a suffocating sense of loneliness and suppression. Kushina's gaze was hollow, her eyes dim and almost devoid of emotion, yet seemingly suppressing intense emotions. It was a feeling of wanting to cry but being unable to shed tears. Who hurt you? Araki was taken aback. He had never seen Kushina like this before. She seemed like a completely different person. It raised complex questions in his mind. Overnight, everything had changed drastically. It was that kind of feeling. He couldn't imagine what could have happened to transform an optimistic and cheerful girl into such a gloomy state. I'm so scared. Kushina mustered some strength and jumped up from the ground. She embraced Araki from the front, her hands tightly wrapped around his neck, and her body trembled uncontrollably. I don't know what to do. I'm filled with despair. Is this my life? I can't accept this cruel reality. Is everything predetermined by fate? I feel so helpless. I can't tell you. I can't say anything. Kushina uttered one sentence after another. It seemed that because it was Araki, the emotions she had suppressed inside her were bursting out like a collapsing torrent. Tears welled up in her vacant and dim eyes, streaming down uncontrollably, falling onto Araki's shoulder. Araki felt the near collapse of Kushina's emotions and faintly understood what had happened. After all, Kushina came to Konoha. It wasn't just for a casual visit. There were more important matters at hand. Damn it. Araki is a time traveler. The process of time travel was also quite unexpected. Compared to other time travelers, Araki felt like he lacked some essential components. However, it seemed that instead of being transported to a completely unfamiliar world, he had arrived in the world of Naruto. Although it was still a time travel experience, for Araki, it had an uncommon advantage. He knew everything that would happen after the current point in time. Kushina Uzumaki came to Konoha not to play around but to replace the wife of the first Hokage, Hashirama Senju, and become the next Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. Before Kushina arrived here, she had no knowledge of these events. So, it was normal for her to experience a certain degree of psychological breakdown upon finding out, especially considering she was just a 9-year-old child. It's time for class. Araki calmly spoke, interrupting Kushina's crying and appearing quite indifferent at that moment. Of course, this was the result he deliberately created. It was a sure thing that Kushina would become the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. The deadline for Mito Uzumaki was approaching, and she could no longer suppress the Nine Tails. If she couldn't complete the transfer of the Nine Tails within the remaining time, the Nine Tails would return to a free state. Araki didn't have the ability to change Kushina's situation, nor did he want to. This was the best arrangement for now. In that case, let Kushina adapt on her own. Before long, Kushina would become the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails, and Araki believed it would be better to keep some distance. Having said that, Araki broke free from Kushina's grasp, picked up the school bag from the ground, and acted as if he was going to class. You. Kushina now appeared pitiful, with tears streaming down her face. Her emotions had just escalated, and a few drops of tears fell, but she hadn't fully vented her helplessness from within. Araki pushed her away before she could do so. How could he be like this? Was the psychological impact she received that great? Didn't he understand how to comfort someone in distress? Besides, I'm miserable right now too. Can't he comfort me a little? Kushina silently complained in her heart, her beautiful eyes glaring at Araki. She kept those words to herself and didn't actually say them out loud. We're going to be late. Araki's tone remained indifferent. He suddenly realized that this was a good opportunity. Despite how heartless it seemed, Kushina's sudden arrival here was something he hadn't expected at all. Everything happened unexpectedly, making him passively handle the situation from start to finish. But at this moment, he suddenly realized that it was an opportunity. An opportunity to distance himself from Kushina. Araki realized that Kushina was at her most helpless moment, and her inner vulnerability had reached its limit. If he were to comfort Kushina, it would inevitably increase her fondness for him, making it more complicated to handle their relationship. After all, it would create a bond. In the future, if Kushina encountered any problems, Araki wouldn't be able to turn a blind eye. Women truly had an impact on the speed of his cultivation. However, if he took advantage of this opportunity to appear more indifferent and deliver another blow to Kushina's already wounded heart because of him, it would certainly change her perception of him. Kushina's personality was inherently stubborn and resilient. This way, he could naturally create some distance between them. Araki silently contemplated in his heart. He knew that by doing this, he might hurt Kushina, but now was not the time for him to step forward. HMPH. Kushina let out a resentful snort, raising her small hand to wipe away the tears in the corners of her eyes, concealing her disheveled appearance. During this process, she seemed somewhat indignant, but she stubbornly remained silent, only stomping her foot to express some of her emotions towards Araki. Then, Kushina firmly picked up her school bag and stood by Araki's side. Due to her recent crying, her eyes were slightly red and swollen, making her look quite pitiful and eliciting sympathy. Don't you care about me at all? Kushina pouted and protested, but from her current demeanor, it seemed that she didn't intend to sever ties with Araki. Weren't you unable to speak? Araki furrowed his brow slightly and responded indifferently. This time, he was the one who felt surprised. He had been so infuriating. If this were in the real world, he would surely have angered the other person and been called a scumbag. However, Kushina seemed completely indifferent. I really can't speak. Kushina immediately lowered her head with a hint of grievance. She kept telling herself that she couldn't blame Araki for this matter. After all, she couldn't say anything, and Araki didn't know anything either, so there was no way he could comfort her. But, Kushina hesitated to speak. After a moment of contemplation, she pursed her lips, shook her head, and muttered to herself, "Forget it, everything will be fine." After saying these words, Kushina seemed to have gained some acceptance. In reality, she also understood that the things that had fallen upon her now could only be accepted without any other options. No matter what emotions she had, they couldn't change the ultimate outcome. It was better to accept it calmly. Kushina slowly raised her head and looked in Araki's direction. Just as her face returned to normal, the corners of her mouth twitched fiercely, and black lines appeared on her forehead. In her line of sight, Araki had already walked away without looking back, carrying his school bag. Araki, wait for me. Kushina immediately quickened her pace, wanting to catch up, but as she sped up, Araki's speed also increased. The distance between them did not diminish in the slightest. Kushina took a few quick steps, trying to close the distance between them, but it was still ineffective. Araki seemed to have eyes on his back, always maintaining the same speed as her. We made a promise. Araki's emotionless voice came from not far ahead. It was not loud, but it clearly reached Kushina's ears. Damn it! Kushina stomped her foot in frustration. The distance between her and Araki wasn't far, but after chatting with that adult all night last night without getting enough rest, she simply didn't have the energy to accelerate anymore. The distance between them seemed short, yet it felt long. They never seemed to be able to get close, giving a sense of being worlds apart. Araki, wait for me. One day, I will catch up to you and you won't be able to shake me off. Kushina wrinkled her nose, tightly clenched her small fist. Even she didn't know why, but she didn't have a single trace of resentment or blame towards Araki. Kushina's gaze focused on Araki, and a sense of challenge emerged in her heart. If it were so easy to become friends with Araki, Araki wouldn't be without a single friend. That in itself was a challenging matter. Encountering a little setback was nothing at all. Sooner or later, she would earn Araki's recognition. Araki always maintained the same speed as Kushina, keeping the distance between them, so they wouldn't appear too close in the eyes of others. It's not quite as I imagined. Araki silently complained in his heart. If this were in the previous real world, he would undoubtedly be seen as a typical scumbag. If given a more euphemistic term, he might be called a big straight man. Even in the ninja world, with Kushina's personality, she would definitely not be able to control herself and would throw punches in anger. He had mentally prepared himself for Kushina's rage. That way, he could take the opportunity to shake off this troublesome girl who had been following him since arriving in Konoha. I'm like this, and she can still keep up. Is she out of her mind? Araki was also quite helpless in his heart. When he acted in that manner, he felt some remorse as well. To some extent, he was hiding his abilities, trying to be low-key, and making himself almost invisible. This wasn't because he had a solitary personality. Everyone hoped to be noticed and become a star among others. But it depended on whether he had the strength to bear the consequences. Araki was well aware that until he had enough power to support his identity as a wood-release ninja, he had to stay low-key, develop subtly, step by step, and avoid stirring up too much trouble. After some time, Araki entered the ninja school and went straight to his usual seat, sitting down. The whole process was as usual, without any presence, and there was no eye contact with any of his classmates. The students in the class were already used to this, paying no attention to Araki at all. In their eyes, Araki simply didn't exist. Step by step, just as Araki had entered not long ago, Kushina rushed in, panting heavily. She had been trying hard to catch up with Araki, but no matter how she ran, she couldn't catch up. Damn it! Kushina leaned against the classroom door frame, gasping for breath, her beautiful eyes staring intently at Araki, who was flipping through a book inside his bag. Even from a classroom's distance, Araki could feel the intensity of her gaze. However, it wasn't the sharp blade he had imagined. It was more like a gentle knife. It felt like it was stabbing, yet it didn't leave any wounds or pain. It cut at the conscience in his heart. Kushina. The students in the class brightened their eyes as they saw Kushina. They all looked towards her. The attitudes of the students here were completely different from the original historical trajectory. It had to be said that this was the price of being arrogant. In the interaction they had yesterday, almost every student had a general understanding of Kushina's personality. She was easygoing and easy to get along with, and her goddess-like appearance instantly attracted everyone's attention. Of course, among them was a seemingly shy boy who didn't come forward like the others to greet Kushina, but secretly kept an eye on her, the Hyuga clan member, who had been paying continuous attention to Kushina. In just one day, Kushina had become the little princess in the class, the goddess in the hearts of many boys who were just beginning to experience love. Children in the ninja world were already a bit more mature, having understood these things early on. In the class, there weren't many likable and adorable girls. Kushina's arrival perfectly filled that void. The students in the class noticed that Kushina's mood seemed off. Her reddened eyes looked as if she had been crying. As they followed Kushina's gaze, their eyes immediately focused on Araki. And when they recalled that Araki had just entered the classroom, with Kushina panting and following closely behind, their eyes were filled with resentment in relation to Araki. Understood. After intense imagination, these students seemed to have come up with a plot that exceeded 800 words. It must be that Kushina wanted to be friends with Araki but received no response, which led to her current appearance. With this in mind, the students in the class were no longer surprised. Kushina, don't mind that weirdo. He's always like that. I can vouch for that. He's not targeting you specifically, he's like that with everyone. Just a weirdo. It's better not to be friends with him. Araki doesn't seem to have any friends at all. He's not worthy of making friends. Kushina, don't bother with that person. He's been through something traumatic before, so he's not normal in the head. Quote. The students in the class explained to Kushina with enthusiasm, and their intentions were evident. They hoped that Kushina wouldn't let Araki, this strange person, ruin her mood. As more and more people spoke, Kushina's face grew darker. She clenched her fists tightly, and faint veins appeared on the back of her hands. Her slightly trembling body seemed to be restraining something. Don't engage in conflicts. Kushina's mind echoed Araki's words. She couldn't explain why, but Araki's words helped her calm down continuously. All right then. Kushina took a deep breath, then slowly exhaled. It seemed like she had released a great deal of pressure from her heart, and she followed it up with a forced smile. She decided to let go of the students present. After all, they were all classmates. And they would have to spend time together. Most importantly, Araki specifically reminded her of this. She didn't want to do anything that would disappoint Araki. The change in Kushina's emotions was evident to the students in the class. They had noticed that Kushina seemed greatly aggrieved in this matter. However, they were unaware that it was they themselves whom Kushina had just endured. They thought it was Araki. In an instant, their gazes shifted towards Araki, and those gazes were truly sharp, capable of killing. In that moment, the students in the class felt that Araki had offended their goddess in their hearts. In their hearts, they had already developed the intention to stand up for their goddess and teach Araki a lesson to win the favor of their goddess. Sigh. Araki felt the gazes directed at him and felt extremely helpless in his heart. He tried his best to appear low-key, but at this moment, he became the target of everyone's disdain. Beautiful beauty is a disaster. Araki couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He hadn't even done anything significant with Kushina, and yet, many people had already set their sights on him. If these people found out that they were living together, the scene would be too beautiful, too unimaginable. Kushina didn't realize until she entered the classroom and sat down that her resentful gaze had affected the students' emotions in the class. Only Araki could truly sense this feeling of being regarded as an enemy by the students in the class. This was definitely not an illusion. Araki had always been invisible in the class, and no one would pay any attention to him. But in this short period of time, many gazes passed over him. This was an unprecedented phenomenon. Sigh. Araki felt that life was becoming more and more difficult. Even if he wanted a peaceful life without bothering others, he couldn't withstand others intentionally causing trouble for him. Feeling the constant gazes directed at him, he had a vague sense of ominous premonition, always feeling that someone might jump out. Based on past history, there were many troublemakers among the students in this class, and they had clashed with Kushina countless times. But now, it seemed that their conflicts were not directed at Kushina but were very likely to target him. Thinking of this, Araki felt extremely helpless in his heart. He could only silently hope that these students could be magnanimous and not engage with him. Step, step, step. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed at the entrance of the ninja school classroom. With this sound of footsteps, the students inside the classroom immediately quieted down. After years of adaptation, they understood that it meant Teacher Yinsui was coming. Although Teacher Yinsui usually seemed approachable, no student could withstand his anger if provoked. The footsteps grew closer, until they reached the entrance, and then the frequency immediately eased, as if they had stopped. Immediately after, a figure emerged and appeared before the students. It was Teacher Yinsui. Teacher Yinsui's gaze swept over the people in the class with indifference, quickly scanning each student's face. As a teacher, he had already memorized each person in his heart, so there was no need for roll call. He knew whether everyone was present or not. Today, we will have a simulated duel. Gather at the playground in 5 minutes. After Teacher Yinsui finished speaking, he turned and left, leaving the bewildered students in the class. None of them expected today's lesson to be so exciting. In the ninja school, simulated duels were conducted every once in a while, where ninjas would be paired up and engage in one-on-one battles. Such simulations helped cultivate the combat awareness of these aspiring ninjas from a young age and tested their progress in their studies. Not only did it inspire a competitive spirit among the students, but it also allowed the teacher to assess the level of the students' abilities more clearly. However, these simulated duels were often random. No one knew which day they would occur. And there was no way to prepare in advance. The ninja school wanted to use this method to teach students that there is never a moment of complete preparation, just like when ninjas are on a mission, anything can happen. This also keeps the students in their best state at all times, as otherwise they may embarrass themselves in front of the entire class. In the simulated duels, the winner may not receive much praise, but the loser will certainly face a lot of mockery. Swish. However, at this moment, several gazes swept towards Araki. These gazes only lasted a moment before shifting away. Araki didn't engage in a stare down with these people, but he could clearly sense the meaning behind their gazes. It seemed, these people were looking forward to being in the same group as him. Perhaps they wanted to use this opportunity to suppress him and win Kushina's favor. Araki helplessly shook his head. Such things didn't really bother him. He had always approached the simulated duels with a laid-back attitude, maintaining a 50% win rate, keeping himself in the middle of the class. He wasn't an easy target to pick on, nor was he an outstanding genius who appeared formidable. Everything was maintained in a balanced manner. As for whether he would win or lose today, that would depend on the performance of the opponent. Araki didn't care about the gazes of these people. He stood up and followed the other students in the class, walking towards the direction of the playground. 5 minutes later, the students in the class stood on the playground, arranged in 3 rows, facing Teacher Yinsui. Next, when I call your name, step forward. You will engage in a simulated duel, fight until I intervene, and make sure not to harm each other. Teacher Yinsui said in a deep voice. As a Chunin from Konoha village, he had no problem dealing with these kids who hadn't graduated from the ninja school. Yes, sir. The students responded in unison, and almost everyone had a serious expression on their faces. These students were still in their childhood, and everyone hoped to defeat their opponents in these duels to demonstrate their strength in front of other children. No one would hide their abilities in this kind of duel. After all, it required a great deal of cunning and strong mental fortitude. Not everyone could endure the loneliness and deliberately answer questions incorrectly in a simulated exam, keeping their score just above the passing line. The first round, Yamanaka Inoichi vs Nara Shikaku. Teacher Yinshui announced the first two names, and two figures stepped out from the queue, coming into view of the students. The two students faced each other with smiles on their faces. They were very familiar with each other. Araki stood in the queue, looking at the two individuals in front of him. The one with blonde hair was Yamanaka Inoichi, a member of the prestigious Yamanaka clan of Konoha. The one with black hair was Nara Shikaku, also from the prestigious Nara clan of Konoha. Together with Akimichi Choza, who was already a big guy at such a young age in the queue, they would form the Inoshika Cho trio of this generation. These three families had a deep connection, and they had grown up together since they were young. They often played together after school and were extremely familiar with each other. Araki recognized these few individuals from the moment he arrived in the ninja world. After all, they were among the few people he could see in the official storyline. Yamanaka Inoichi was the father of Yamanaka Ino, Nara Shikaku was the father of Nara Shikamaru, and Akimichi Choza was the father of Akimichi Choji. The descendants of these three individuals were also outstanding in their own right. For a while, the attention of the students in the class was fully engaged. Yamanaka Inoichi and Nara Shikaku both had excellent academic records in the class and belonged to the top tier. The fact that these two were facing each other in a duel was a relief for them, as it meant they could avoid encountering such formidable opponents. At the same time, these students were also very curious about who would win between these two. On the playground, the students in the class all had their eyes focused on Inoichi Yamanaka and Nara Shikaku. They were extremely curious about the duel between these two. Shikaku, I won't show any mercy. If you can't hold on, remember to admit defeat. Inoichi Yamanaka said with a smile. You too, Nara Shikaku replied with a smile. Let's begin. Inoichi Yamanaka's smile disappeared from his face as he raised his right hand and formed a hand seal with his index and middle fingers, creating a confrontational gesture. Start. Nara Shikaku raised his left hand and made the same hand seal. In the next moment, the battle between the two was about to begin. Inoichi Yamanaka and Nara Shikaku seemed to have reached an agreement and decided not to use any secret techniques from their respective families. Instead, they charged at each other directly, using their hands and feet to collide in physical combat. Bang, bang, bang. Their hands and feet collided repeatedly, creating intense sounds. If someone didn't know better, they might have thought they were martial arts ninjas. After a brief exchange, both of them stepped back simultaneously, reaching into their pockets and pulling out shurikens to throw accurately at each other. Ding, ding, ding. The shurikens from both sides collided, producing a clear metallic clashing sound, displaying a balanced and evenly matched stance. The duel between Inoichi Yamanaka and Nara Shikaku drew exclamations from the students here. They widened their eyes, afraid to miss any details. At the same time, they were also contemplating in their minds whether they could keep up with the attacks if they were standing here. This secretly made them feel uneasy. The initial excitement they felt when they heard about the simulated duel gradually dissipated, replaced by anxiety and unease. Teacher Yinsui's gaze remained fixed on the duel arena. He had a responsibility to ensure the safety of the students and prevent any accidental injuries. Their basic skills are indeed impressive. Teacher Yinsui silently nodded. When he chose the groups, it wasn't entirely random. He tried to select individuals he believed had similar abilities. Only then could the true strength be tested. Just like these two individuals. Teacher Yinsui suddenly furrowed his brow, sensing that something was amiss. After the intense shuriken clash, Inoichi Yamanaka and Nara Shikaku once again engaged in close-quarters combat. Their fists and feet collided, producing thudding sounds. Both of them were swift and powerful in their movements, yet they didn't inflict any harm on each other. They maintained a stalemate. Nara Shikaku accurately blocked Inoichi Yamanaka's swift straight punch with the palm of his hand. Inoichi Yamanaka intercepted Nara Shikaku's powerful knee strike with his sharp elbow. The two of them put on quite a lively show. But the more Teacher Yinsui watched, the more it seemed like acting. Of course, only Teacher Yinsui could see through this. The rest of the students were exclaiming at the impressive strength of the two combatants. Teacher Yinsui became increasingly suspicious. He felt that these two students weren't really dueling but rather performing, yet he had no evidence. Just at that moment, after a series of close-quarters attacks, both of them stepped back simultaneously and once again threw shurikens at each other. The shurikens clashed accurately in midair. This time, the effect was even more apparent. Inoichi Yamanaka and Nara Shikaku's shurikens they threw at each other didn't seem like they were meant to hit their opponents. It appeared more like they were aiming to strike the shurikens thrown by their opponents. Clang, clang. As the sound of shuriken collisions continued, Teacher Yinsui's expression became increasingly exasperated. All right, stop. That's enough, it's a tie. Yinsui helplessly called off the simulated duel between the two. He felt that if he didn't intervene, these two could keep going until the end of the school day. Their acting skills clearly indicated that they were aiming for a draw. Yes. Inoichi Yamanaka and Nara Shikaku almost simultaneously stopped, showing no intention to continue the fight. They both turned towards Teacher Yinsui. Then, the two of them locked eyes for a moment. A faint smile curled up at the corners of their mouths. They could see the understanding between each other in their eyes. They walked forward, approaching each other until they were face to face. Simultaneously, they extended the hands that had just formed the hand seal, with those same two fingers directly hooking onto each other, resembling a locking mechanism. This hand seal was the symbol of reconciliation among ninjas. Ninjas perform the seal of opposition before a duel, indicating to their opponent that the battle is about to begin. After the fight, they perform the seal of reconciliation, symbolizing that they are still comrades and that any rift can be resolved. Teacher Yinsui didn't miss the small movements between the two, but those things were no longer important. Even if these two put on a coordinated performance, it gave him a better understanding of their abilities and set a good tone for the simulated duel. Teacher Yinsui gained some experience from this incident, realizing that next time during the simulated duel, he definitely couldn't group these two together. Next group. Teacher Yinsui's gaze moved towards the line, and after the incident between Inoichi Yamanaka and Nara Shikaku, he understood that he couldn't choose close friends who had too much understanding of each other. These young students had already learned how to put on a show. Araki. Teacher Yinsui's gaze immediately fell on Araki. He felt it was appropriate to call out Araki first since this student had a solitary personality and no friends, or rather, didn't have any friends at all. There would be no chance for them to collude and fake another round. After all, this was a simulated duel at the ninja school. They couldn't cheat all the time, otherwise, it would lose its credibility. After calling out Araki's name, Teacher Yinsui scanned the other students in the line, looking for someone suitable. In an instant, he saw many eager eyes. It left him bewildered. When did Araki become so popular? No one paid attention to him before, but now there were suddenly many students, using their eyes to indicate that they wanted to be selected for the simulated duel. Such a scene. It puzzled Teacher Yinsui. However, he wasn't sure about Araki's true abilities, so he couldn't hastily choose his opponent for the match. As he contemplated, his gaze landed on the person at the back of the line, who was also eager. Why not let him go? Even if Araki were to lose, it wouldn't be too embarrassing. After all, the other person came from a prestigious clan. Hyuga Sora. Teacher Yinsui called out a name that shocked the entire class.